Hi, Gene. I hope all is well with you in Shanghai. And I thought it might be easier if I just did a quick screen recording here to show you how to do that layered effect in Pixlr to where you can have your vertical images and have that background out of focus as well. And I'm just going to use an image I have of my son here on the desktop that we'll use. And so I'll go ahead and kind of demonstrate with that. The first thing I'm going to do is launch Pixlr. And it's pixlr.com, and that brings us to Pixlr here, and you'll notice that you get a couple of pop-up windows that say, do you want the Pixlr Editor or Pixlr Express? The Editor is what we want, and so you can click on Launch Web App, and that will launch it. You'll notice that the URL now it says pixlr.com/editor. So if you just bookmark that, it'll take you straight to the editor, and that's kind of what I usually do, so that it gets me right into where I want to work. The window that you see in front of you allows you to create a brand new image from the get-go, or you can open an image that's on your computer, or you can access images in other areas as well. And so for this, I'm going to select Create a New Image. If you recall, the screen size of a video today is generally what's called a 16:9 ratio. So it's a wide format screen like you would have on most computers. And so we're going to want to select that as a preset. And if you notice this preset drop down here, if I click on it, and then I'll have to scroll down. Since you are working on a video or on a movie, I would suggest that you use the movie 1080p. And what that will come to once I open that up here is a window that is now that 16:9 ratio of what we see today in today's flat screen TVs. And the dimensions of that, if you look in the lower right hand or lower left hand corner here, is 1920 pixels by 1080. So the width of it is 1920, the vertical is 1080. That 1080 will be important here in a little bit as we get further into this. If you look over on the right hand side, you should have a few windows open, and so the top one is Navigator, the second one I have here is Layers, and the third one is History. Layers is the important one. That's the one that we're going to be working on here. I'm just going to go ahead and close History. History shows you every single click that you do, any changes that you make. For this little exercise here, that's not that important. But the layers one is, and that's what we're going to be kind of talking about primarily here. So now that I have my new image created here and sized to 1920 by 1080, we're going to work within this layers window here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the image of my son on the desktop. So I'm going to select File, Open Image. And I'll go to my desktop and I'll find his image, which is right here, and open that. And so it comes in sideways, but that's just the way that image was actually taken. So what you'll have on the screen here is two separate windows. I got the image of my son here that's displayed, and then behind it is what the finished product will be once we're done working on it. And if I go to the image of my son here, and I'll just rotate this now so that you can see how that's done and how easier for us to view this. I'm going to go to the image menu in the upper left corner, and I'm going to select Rotate Canvas 90 degrees clockwise. And when I do that, it now flips the image. If you look in the lower left hand corner like we did on the previous image, you'll see the size of this particular image of my son is almost 2500 pixels wide by a little over 3200 high, which is much larger than we need. And so the first thing I would do is to take this master image that we have here and let's size it down so we can bring it into that 16:9 video window. And to size it down, I'm going to choose image size at the top option here under the image menu, and I'm going to change I know that the size of my window is 1920 by 1080, and so what I will do, since we're working with a vertical image, is I'll set the vertical parameter to be 1080 and allow the computer to figure out what the width should be based on this checkbox here that says constrain proportions. If I set one setting, it'll automatically adjust the other one to be appropriate. So since my height's going to be 1080, since I know that's what my window is, I'm going to select that. And so now you see the image of my son here is set to 1080 high. Again, that's indicated in the lower left corner of this window. It's now 810 by 1080. we are only looking at 32% of the view, so if I grabbed the magnifying glass in my toolbar on the left, I could zoom into it and increase the size of the image, but it's still, the pixel dimensions is still 810 by 1080 high in this case. Once I have the image of my son selected to 1080, I'm going to go ahead and select all and copy it into the other window where I can start working on it at that point. And so I'm going to select all, and I can do that either by going to the Edit menu and choosing Select All, or you'll notice that the keyboard shortcut is Control A if you're on a Windows machine, excuse me, or Command A if you're on a Mac. And so I'm just going to go ahead and hit Command A, and you'll see that my image is now bounded by the dotted lines here. And now that I have that completely selected, I'm going to say Copy or Command C to copy that. And I'm done with this window now. I can go over to the window that I have behind, which is my 1920 by 1080 window that we'll be building this in. And I'm simply going to Command V to paste that image in. And so I've now brought in the image of my son. Take a look at the layers window that you see over on the right hand side. Close off a little appointment there. The layer that I have, or the layers window that I have, now has that white background that we started with, 1920 by 1080 in size. I now just copied the image of my son in the background and I pasted it right on top, and so it automatically created another layer. And it has his image in it. You can see that. I'm going to do it again, so I have actually two layers on here. So I'm going to do Command V again, and you'll now notice that I have layer 1 and layer 2, both the same image, one in front and one behind. So the hierarchical structure of the layers is that whatever is on top is going to be your frontmost layer, and then followed by the layers behind it. You'll notice the checkbox on the right side of the layers window here, that shows visibility. So if I turn off the first one, you're not going to see any difference here, but what I'm actually doing is turning off the view of the top layer, and but you still see the other image because it's an exact copy of it on the layer 1 there. If I turn off layer 1, you'll notice that we're just back to the blank background that we started with. So given that, I'm going to go ahead and turn both of the layers on, and so this image of my son is now duplicated one on top of the other. You'll notice that a layer is highlighted. Right now layer 2 is highlighted in blue. If I click on layer 1, that would be highlighted. Whichever layer is highlighted is the one that you would be actively working on, and so we want to make sure that we have the appropriate layer selected before we start making any changes or effects to it. So in this case, what I'm going to do, just so that you can see how this resizing works, is I'm going to turn off layer 2, the top layer, by clicking the checkbox on the right. And we're now just looking at layer 1, and I have that now highlighted. And what I want to do is to expand this image so it fills the background frame. And that's kind of the point we're trying to get to here, is to give you that out of focus background. And so to change its size, I'm going to go to Edit and Free Transform. In Photoshop, it's usually Edit and Transform Scale. In Pixlr here, they just say Free Transform. So I'm going to go to the Edit menu, Free Transform, and select that. You'll notice that the image is bound by the size handles here. And I can grab one of those corners and just begin to stretch out the window. You'll notice that if I just grab a corner and stretch it, it kind of gets distorted. If I hold the Shift key down, it will maintain its the proper aspect ratio. And so I'm holding my Shift key down and then dragging the size of this window, and I'm going to completely fill the frame as best I can, just like that. And if I click off of it, it's going to ask me, do you want to apply the changes? And I want to say yes. So if you now look at the layers window over on the right hand side, you'll see layer 1 is the expanded view of the image, and then layer 2, which is right now not visible. If I bring layer 2 up and I click on the checkbox to make it visible, you'll see that we now have one image on top of the other. This old image that's in the background, I'm just going to close that so it doesn't confuse you here. And we're not going to save that. So this is what we're working with. We have our two layers. Layer 1 has been expanded in the background. Layer 2 is what's on top of it. I'm just going to hide layer 2 again, the top layer, just so we can look at the background image. And then the last thing we want to do is to put that blur effect in here. And I use what's called the Gaussian blur just because it gives me a little bit more control. And so that is under the filter menu. So if I click on filter, Gaussian blur, and as I grab the slider and start to bring it up, you'll see, I'm sorry, you won't, because I have the wrong layer highlighted here. Let's make sure I didn't screw up the other one. Okay. So case in point. So you want to make sure you have the layer you want to affect highlighted. And I'm going to go back to filter, Gaussian blur, and drag that forward, and you'll see now I'm blurring that background. So once I think I have that blurred enough, I can hit OK. And if I go back to my layers window, I'm going to turn on the top layer, layer 2, and there we go. That gives you everything that you're looking for, I believe. You'll see that our image in the lower left-hand corner is 1920 by 1080. That's the size of the window you'll probably be editing in if you're in iMovie or Windows Movie Maker. 16 by 9 aspect ratio. You have the two layers here, one on top of the other. The background has been expanded and taken out of focus. Once you've got that, you can save your image. So go to File, Save. And you can give it a name here. I'll just call it Landon and save it to my desktop so that you can see that here in a second. And it's going to be a JPEG, which is perfect for editing video. And I just increased the quality a little bit. You can choose to do that or not. I'm sure it'll look fine either way. And if you hit OK, it's going to ask me to save it. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and we are done. So I'm going to minimize this window, go to my desktop so that you can see it. And there's the picture of my son, and if I call it up, there you have it. And so you now have the two different layers. I know I did that fast. That was a lot to cover. You can play this back and take a listen and see if it works for you. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you need me to do it a little bit more slowly or a little bit more clearly. I'm not going to edit this, so you're going to see all my fumbles as I go along here, but hopefully that'll give you something to start with. Let me know how it goes. Thanks.